Barak and Shalom. This is Nabi Ahaya Elua, or Nabi Ahaya Elohim, Malek Boaz ben Yochanan ben Dawid. And today will be another installment of Out of Context Scriptures. This portion of the series will be in reference to Romans 14. Now, I've been having discussions with a very respected elder of my old Seventh-day Adventist church recently about Romans 14 and the understanding, the contextual understanding that most people, the majority of the people that subscribe to this, Christians that is, understand what it means. And their understanding of it is that Paul is separating himself, as well as all the new converts, from the respectable Jewish feasts, or not Jewish, I'm sorry, Hebrew feasts and festivals and ordained specific days that Yahuwah had set in place. Now, the real interesting thing is that Seventh-day Adventists, they celebrate the Sabbath. They go to church on the Sabbath, on Saturday. They recognize and acknowledge the Sabbath. They also, for the most part, have an Old Testament Hebrew diet. They are, for the most part, vegetarian. They don't typically eat much meat. If they do eat meat, it is fish and fowl. Pretty much totally. You will very rarely catch a serious respectable Seventh-day Adventist eating anything like beef, and especially you will never, ever find them eating pork. Now, the thing is, I want to highlight that last one, pork. Pork is not one of the 10 Commandments. Now, the thing is that the Seventh-day Adventists, they say they respect the 10 Commandments, and they understand that the rest of the laws and statutes were nailed to the cross with Christ. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And I will prove that here shortly. But to go along with that, so they completely uphold and respect all the 10 Commandments. And the main commandment that they respect and uphold above all other churches is the 4th commandment, to keep the Sabbath day holy, to rest on it, to not do any work or any labor, to not have your family, your friends, and even your animals do any work on that day, for it is a holy day of rest unto Yahuwah. And they respectfully respect that. Even many of them often fast on the Sabbath as an extra show of piety and reverence to Yahuwah and Yahushua, who is the master of the Sabbath. Okay, so the misconception about Romans 14 is that Paul is telling the Romans that they don't need to have acknowledgement or respect for certain days. And the Christians believe those certain days are reflecting the Hebrew festival and feast days that were ordained by Yahuwah. Why I say this is absolutely wrong and completely incorrect is because when he set these in place, he said that these were things that we were supposed to do perpetually throughout our generations. And I will prove this to you later on also. Now, we all believe, those who believe in God, believe that God never changes, right? He never changes. He always stays the same. God is the same today, yesterday, and forever, right? Now, the Seventh-day Adventists, they completely know and understand that when Peter saw the sheep coming down out of heaven showing all the animals, that it had nothing to do with them being able to eat those animals, and everything to do with them being able to now congregate with the people that those animals represent. And I will prove that with scripture here shortly also. But my point of mentioning that is that the Seventh-day Adventists know specifically that when Paul saw that sheet, that God was not giving him permission to eat pork. They still respect the fact that you cannot eat pork. Pork was not a part of the Ten Commandments. Pork was one of the laws, statutes, and commandments that were aside the Ten Commandments, that the Israelites were still supposed to respect and adhere to perpetually throughout their generations. The interesting thing is that the Seventh-day Adventists, they adhere to this still throughout their generations. They still don't eat pork. They still see it as abominable. And I will point out in this video from the scriptures that God never gave an ordinance to eat pork. Period, point blank. Now, the reference for the most part itself initially will be coming from the Old Testament. So a lot of people will argue against that because they will say that I don't have a New Testament reference that coincides with the fact that Jews or God's chosen people, be it you're a Jew or you call yourself a Christian, are not supposed to eat pork. I will have to find something and put that in a later video that there is something in the New Testament that corroborates with that. But we're going to step aside from that right now for this video. Okay. So, again, the Seventh-day Adventists, they admit and acknowledge that we are not supposed to eat pork whatsoever. All right. And once again, I mentioned this is not a part of the Ten Commandments. This is part of the last laws, statutes, and commandments outside of the Ten Commandments that Yahuwah still told us were to be perpetual. Now, the thing is, in reference to the pork, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. The thing is, in reference to the pork, there were other animals, such as seafood. Let me be specific about this. Christians, even if you are God's people, if you are God's chosen people, if you are followers of Christ, followers of the way, then you are also not supposed to eat any sea creature that does not have both scales and fins. They also are abominable. So that cuts out catfish, that cuts out calamari, that cuts out crayfish, lobster, crab, shrimp, shark meat, whale meat, all of that. It cuts all of that out. You're only supposed to eat things that have scales and fins. Okay, and if you would like, which I don't really think it's necessary, but if you would like, we can go into Exodus. I believe that's where it's listed. So that way we can acknowledge what it is that Yahuwah told us is abominable, that we cannot eat. Okay. Now, within that list, there are a couple of animals that were on the sheet that Peter saw come down from heaven. So you know what? I think it is important that we pull up that list. Okay. Abominable foods. Okay. All right. Now you see that scripture. We're going to get back to that a little bit later. Let's go back. Let's go clean and unclean foods. Okay. Let's say unclean food. And I do apologize. You know, I'm still trying to learn and get better with the memorization of these particular chapters and verses. Okay, I saw Leviticus, meats that touches anything ceremonially unclean, Deuteronomy. Okay, so I guess the list is in Deuteronomy. I was wrong. I said Exodus. I thought Deuteronomy. I couldn't remember. I was wrong. I have no problem with admitting when I am wrong. That's a part of growth, and that is absolutely a part of perfection as a human. Okay, so let's use one of my favorite versions is the New Living Translation. But I think I will use, if I can find it, the American King James. Okay. So let's see what this says. All right. Now, I want to remind you again, this list of unclean foods are for anyone who acknowledges Yahuwah, Yahweh, Jehovah as their God. Because this is what he, as the God, says that he wishes his people not to eat, to keep themselves clean, pure, and undefiled. Okay? It says here, Deuteronomy chapter 14, verses 3 through 3 through 8. You shall not eat anything abominable, any abominable thing. These are the beasts which those are the ones which you shall eat. Okay, I want the ones that you shall not eat. Okay, well, we'll have to go through the list because I think it's mingled in. As a matter of fact, it is mingled in. Okay, these are the beasts which you shall eat: the ox, the sheep, the goat, the hart, the roebuck, and the fallow deer, the wild goat, and the pygarg, the wild ox, and the chamois. I'm not sure if that's a chameleon. That's interesting. I've never heard that term. We'll have to look at a different version to see what that word chamois comes out to in a different version. We'll check that in a minute. And every beast that parts the hoof and separates the cleft into two claws, and chews the cud among the beasts, that you shall eat. Nevertheless, these you shall not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the cloven hoof. A camel you cannot eat. A rabbit you're not supposed to eat. A coney, or like a rock badger, you're not supposed to eat. For they chew the cud, but their hooves are not divided. Actually, they don't even have hooves except a camel. No, camels don't even have hooves. They all have feet and toes. Therefore, they are unclean to you. And the swine, because it divides the hoof, yet chews not the cud, it is unclean to you. You shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their dead carcasses. You're not even supposed to touch a pork chop. It makes you unclean automatically when you touch a pork chop, according to Yah. Okay, let's go further. These you shall eat that are in the waters, all that have fins and scales shall you eat, and whatever has not fins and scales you may not eat. It is unclean to you. Let's go ahead and look at the birds. Of all the clean birds you shall eat, but these are they of which you shall not eat: the eagle, the ossifrage, the osprey, and the glade or the glide, and the kite, and the vulture, and every kind of vulture after his kind, and the raven, and every kind of raven after his kind, and the owl, and the night hawk, and all the hawks and owls after their kind, the little owl, and the great owl, and the swan, and the pelican, the gyre eagle, the cormorant, and the stork, and the heron after her kind, and the lapwing, and the bat, and every creeping thing that flies is unclean to you. They shall not be eaten, but of the clean fowls you may eat. And when it says creeping thing, it's talking about bugs. So bugs that fly are unclean to us. Now, some may consider locusts and grasshoppers bugs that fly, but they're not. They're actually bugs that leap and hover with wings. They don't fly. They don't stay in the air. And that's why grasshoppers and locusts are clean insects or creepy crawly things that we are able to eat, though they have wings. Okay, so before we actually read the chapter of Acts that is out of context, since I've went this far already into the description of what we are able and what we are not able to eat, as far as the vision that Peter had in the chapter of Acts, I think it is wise that we go ahead and go straight to the chapter of Acts. So we are going to Acts chapter chapter 10. We're going to go to Acts chapter 10. And within chapter 10, we're going to be reading verses 9 through 20, and then 28 and 29. Pay attention very closely to the words that are being read. On the morrow, as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up to the housetop to pray about the 6th hour, and he became very hungry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven opened and a certain vessel descending on him, as it had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of 4-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the earth. And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." And the voice spoke to him again the 2nd time, "What God has cleansed, that call not you common." Or in other words, you cannot call common. This was done thrice, 3 times, and the vessel was received up into heaven again. Now, while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which had been seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made injury to Simon's house and stood before the gate, and called and asked whether Simon, which is surnamed Peter, were lodged there. While Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Behold, 3 men seek you. Arise, therefore, get you down," or go down there, "and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them." Now we're going to go to 28 and 29. Listen, this is very, very important, people. Very, very, very important when it comes to when we finally get into Romans 4, okay? And he said to them, "You know how it is an unlawful or an abominable thing for a man that is a Hebrew or a Jew to keep company or to come to of another nation, to keep company with or to come to any heathen nation. But God, Yahuwah, has shown me that I should not call any man a heathen. Therefore, I came to you without gainsaying, without any complication. As soon as I was sent for, I asked, therefore, what intent you have sent for me." That is very, very, very important. There is something that coincides with that in the Gospels when Christ was sitting at the well in Samaria, and he met with the woman, and she said, "Well, why are you talking to me? You're a Jew. Jews don't speak to Samaritans." The reason why Jews didn't speak to Samaritans is because Samaria, or the northern kingdom of Israel, had been taken over by Assyria, and had been assimilated. So the people in Syria were no longer full-blooded Jews. They were no longer full-blooded Hebrews. They were half Hebrew heathens, according to the rest of Israel. So the rest of Israel did not confer with them according to the rules of the Jews. The Jews were not supposed to mix and mingle with other nations, regardless if they were in the country or not. They were not supposed to mix and mingle with them. The main reason was because God knew that they would pick up their ways. One reason why, and the only reason why God knew that they would pick up their ways, is because he had cultivated them since he pulled the group together. And every area of slavery and bondage and servitude that they sojourned in for an extended amount of time, when they came out of that land, they brought something from that land with them. Either some form of teaching, some form of knowledge, or some form of action, activity, or practice. Now, with some of these things, God allowed, Yahuwah allowed, because they did need to be applied to the Israelites and their new origin and way of life. But everything else he rejected and told them to reject also. And so when they moved into the land of Canaan, he told them to reject everything that the people in the land were doing. Furthermore, he didn't want them to mingle with those people, because once you mingle with them and you become friendly with them, you begin picking up their ways and their mannerisms. Much like how a lot of the black people in the black consciousness movement call a lot of blacks coons and traitors and Uncle Toms and everything else, simply because certain blacks have certain mannerisms that are only attributed to white people. Mannerisms like clean speech, like myself, intelligent speech, intelligent comprehension, problem solving without problem creation. And now the thing is, the truth of the matter is that these attributes and abilities really come from blacks in antiquity. Be it Babylon, be it Egypt, be it whatever. These mannerisms of social living and of hygiene and things like that, they came initially and originally from blacks. This can be proven simply by doing your homework about Europe, about the Anglo-Saxons, and about the Vikings and the Slavonics and you know, all those people. They were known as dirty, trifling, nasty, disease-ridden people. This can also be proven once the whites came to America. All of a sudden, disease spread rampantly the more whites that were here in this country. Whereas the native, Negro, Indian, Aborigine Americans had no knowledge of any of these diseases or illnesses prior to the white man. Okay? All right. So let me get back on subject, because that was just, I veered off a little bit, but that's a true history lesson. And don't get me wrong, I'm not ragging on white people. I love white people to death. You know, a lot of blacks, especially the blacks in those black consciousness movements and groups, they hate me because I love white people. I love white people. I love all people. But I love white people the most simply because if a black person is really intelligent, will understand that white people are our children. White comes from black. Period. Factual. None other than. Simple as that. Whites come from blacks. So just like a child comes from a mother and a father, just like a human comes from the God who created it, whites come from blacks. Period. So whites are our children. That's why I love them. We've got to raise them. We've got to cultivate them. They're lost and confused. Why do you think so many of them try to tan themselves dark? They're trying to get back to their origin. We are their origin. Why do you think so many of them fall into black mannerisms, like slang words, like sagging? Because they're trying to get back to their origin. We are their origin. Blacks created rock music. Whites took that over. Blacks created country music. Whites took that over. Blacks created pop music. Whites took that over. Blacks created rap music. Whites are now trying to take that over. They're assimilating into our culture and re-assimilating the culture as their own. That's because they are lost and they have no knowledge. And the fact of the matter is that they wish not to have that knowledge, because the few whites that do know that they come from blacks, there's a handful of them that hang with blacks and know that they come from blacks, and they are comforted by that. Then there are a handful of whites that know that they come from blacks and they hate the fact that they do. And that is what makes them hate blacks that much more. They don't want to have to acknowledge the fact that we are their origin. That can be proven in the Bible also. Let's go ahead and prove that. Let's go ahead and put that. Okay. I'm going to use my New Living Translation. This is how we're going to prove that whites came from blacks. All right. And then I'm going to get back to the subject. Okay. Perform this sign. All right. Here he is. Exodus 4:6. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, now put your hand inside your cloak. So Moshe put his hand in his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was white as snow, with a severe skin disease. Now, I've put out statements, comments, and videos about this before, and naturally I got a lot of backlash, and I don't really care. The truth is what it is, and a lot of times the truth hurts, and it sucks. The truth sucks. But the truth is that whiteness was a disease for black people. Initially, originally, whiteness is a disease. It's a dis-ease. Okay? It's against an easement. It's a disease. It's clearly making notion right here. Now, even if you don't want to acknowledge the Bible, you ain't got to. The mitochondrian mother, or the mitochondrian woman, is an Ethiopian woman who scientists, and you can already assume that 90% of these scientists are white, Caucasian Anglo-Saxons who admit that she is the first human being and that all human beings come from her. So if all human beings come from this mitochondrian woman, who was an Ethiopian woman, who even the scientists will absolutely vehemently acknowledge was of extremely dark black skin, then there is scientific proof that whites come from blacks. And the form of leprosy in its initial form was the skin turning white and porous and having sores all over it on black skin. White was a disease initially for black people. And it clearly says that. And then Yahuwah goes on to say, now put your hand back in your cloak. And so when Moses put his hand back in and he took his hand out, it was as healthy as the rest of his body. Healthy as the rest of his body. It was back to his blackness, his healthiness. Okay? So I know that's going to upset a lot of people, but it's true. And you can do your own history. You can do your own research. And I already know this is not going to only upset white people. It's going to upset black people too. It's going to upset the black people who truly are coons, who truly are race traitors, who truly do fight for whites above blacks, or whites above all human beings. You know what I'm saying? And there are a few of them that I know, who speak very highly for white people, as if they get so much privilege and so much prestige and so much reward from whites. And I'm not going to put his name out, but there's one particular gentleman in particular, and I've had debates and conversations with him for about a year now. And sir, I know you know who I'm talking about. You're a real estate agent. If you're listening to this video, me and you talk quite often. I'm going to take you on a hot air balloon ride, so you know who you are. All right. But yeah, I believe that you're one of those blacks that you fight to force other blacks to try their best to understand whites. when the situation should be that whites need to try their best to understand, first of all, themselves, their origin, and then need to understand us, who are their origin. Okay? All right. So anyway, this is went way off subject. I need to get back on subject. Okay? And the subject is the fact that Romans 14 is out of context. And it's out of context because people think that the chapter is telling Christians that they don't have to respect the festival and feast days that God has set in place. Okay? And now I've been able to produce information from Deuteronomy in reference to food that we're not supposed to eat. And then I went ahead and referenced a situation in Acts where Peter saw a whole bunch of different animals, 4-footed animals, come down on a sheet. And there was a spirit voice that said, get up and eat. And he said, I'm not going to. And then the spirit said, do not call common or unclean what God has made clean. And then once he woke up and met with the 3 men that were waiting there for him, and then he went to wherever they were going and he sat down and had a conversation with them, it was clearly referenced, or it was clearly explained that the animals on the sheet were referencing or were depicting different nations, different human factions on the world or in the world. Okay? That the Jews were at first not supposed to congregate, communicate, or mix and mingle with other nations. But that at this point in time, now God has lifted that veil. Yahuwah has lifted that veil, and he has lifted that ban. And he says, you know what? I have made all man. So from there, and you Jews, you Hebrews are really just as filthy and defiled as the rest of humanity. So there's no reason for me to have the rest of humanity labeled as unclean or defiled when you Hebrews and you Jews are no different, no better, and you pick up a lot of their same ways and mannerisms. So they're going to be labeled just as clean and as worthy as you are. That's what that complete understanding of that verse was. That's the overstanding, as a matter of fact. And so when we get into Romans 14, that correlates the same type of understanding, okay? So Acts 10 lets us know that sometimes there are representations in the Bible that are not direct correlated representations, but indirect representations. Throughout the Old Testament, humans are always depicted, or nations are always depicted as some form of an animal. Look at Daniel chapter 4, Daniel chapter 10, Daniel chapter 12. Okay? Nations are always depicted as animals. People are always depicted as, or collective of people are always depicted as animals, a type of animal. All right? So in Acts 10, he's not talking about he gets to eat any kind of animal, that all the animals were made unclean. No, it is talking about that all humans now are made clean, and you can congregate and eat with anyone. And so that coincides and correlates with what Paul says in Romans 4. Now we can go to Romans. Okay? Because Paul is talking not only to Romans, but he's also talking to Roman Jews. Okay? So he's not just talking to Roman pagans, but he's also talking to Roman Jews. And he's letting them know that they don't have to confuse one another with respect of what's being eaten, what's not being eaten, and how things are being eaten. This has nothing to do with God's ordained perpetual feast and festival days. Has nothing to do with it. And we're going to prove that. First of all, we're going to go ahead and read Romans chapter 14. And it says, accept other believers who are weak in faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it is right to eat anything. Now, I want you to focus on this as I read this. This chapter speaks nothing about feast days or festival days or holy/holidays. It speaks nothing about specific ordinances or ordained days. It speaks only and specifically about eating. Completely about eating. Okay? For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything. But another believer with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. So right there. Now we got the Roman pagans, and we got the Roman Jews. He says, for instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything. The Roman pagan believes it's all right to eat anything. Horse, cow, monkey, deer, pig. Whereas another believer with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. A Roman Jew who still has a vegetarian or a vegan diet, who still prescribes to the letter of the Old Testament or the Torah. Okay? Those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't. And those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do. For God has accepted them. Who are you to condemn someone else's servant? Their own master will judge whether they stand or fall. And with Yahuwah's help, they will stand and receive his approval. Now, this resonates with what I mentioned in the beginning of my video when I said that Christians should not eat certain foods. Okay, well, naturally, according to this verse, I shouldn't tell a Christian what they should and should not eat. All right, and I'll respect that because that's God's word. But it is also ordained that I am to still inform a person if they are unknowledgeable or ill-informed of what the correct diet is, or what the correct forms or types of food that we are able to eat are. Now, if they still choose to eat that is their choice. I don't rag on nobody when they eat pork. I've got a person that lives with me. He eats pork. You can ask him if you ever get to talk to him. I don't trip on him every time he eats pork. As a matter of fact, it's real interesting. The majority of my house is either Seventh-day Adventist or Hebrew Jew, Hebrew Israelite. So relatively nobody in my house eats pork. And the interesting thing is that he himself, even though he is a pork eater, is slowly starting to be disdained or disgusted by the taste of pork. And we don't do anything to him. We don't rag on him. We don't tell him he shouldn't eat pork. We don't stop him from cooking pork in our kitchen, in our house. You know, even though I probably should, but I don't. You know, I respect him and his own diet. Okay? So in that respect, I am doing what Paul says. I don't burden him. I don't condemn him for what he eats. I tell him I don't eat it. I tell him that, humans themselves shouldn't eat it because both catfish and pork are bottom feeders. They are nature's trash cans. They eat literally anything, including garbage. And you have to understand whatever they eat goes into their meat. And that's the meat that you eat. So just let that sink in a little bit, okay? So yeah, in any regard, they will eventually stand and find the approval and receive the approval of Yahuwah himself, because he will move them. Just like he's moving the individual that I'm talking about. It is Yah who is creating a disgusting feeling and taste in that man's mouth when it comes to pork. Not me, not my Hebrew children, not my Seventh-day Adventist wife. It's Yah alone. So, so it is right and it is righteous for us to make mention and make notification of what things should be done and what things should not be done. But to rag on somebody in reference to their eating, and this is what this entire chapter is about, is unrighteous. And in a sense, it's sacrilegious. In a sense, also, it's an abomination. It's going against the love factor. Okay? So let's finish this. In the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship Yahuwah on a special day do it to honor him. Those who eat any kind of food do so to honor Yahuwah, since they give thanks to Yahuwah before eating. And those who refuse to eat certain foods also want to please Yahuwah and give thanks to Yahuwah. For we don't live our lives or die for our lives. If we live, it's to honor Yahuwah, and if we die, it's to honor Yahuwah. So whether we live or die, we belong to Yahuwah. Christ died and rose again for this very purpose, to be Lord, or to be Adon, or to be the ruler, or Malek, or king, that is, of both the living and the dead. All right. Now, here is the verse that all Christians hang on. It is verse 5. In the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. He was saying this for the sake of the Roman pagans. The reason why he was saying this for the sake of the Roman pagans is because the Roman Jews were very vehement about the respect of day of worship. Now, this does this specific verse a lot of time resonates very, very heavily with the respect of the Sabbath day. Okay? And in any respect, in any regard, I will say this, that when it comes to this chapter speaking about Sabbath days versus yearly feasts and festivals, that this verse has more ground and more strength and more tension in creating an argument about respecting Saturday over Sunday versus respecting Easter over Passover. Okay? Now, I also want to say this. In this right here is a Roman Catholic conjuration. This right here is not Paul the Hebrew, Paul the Benjamite Jew speaking. Because him speaking in this manner would be blasphemous as a Jew. He wouldn't do this as a Jew. He would be speaking against himself and his own ordinances and his own tenets as a Jew. Okay? So I'm telling you right now, this right here is a rewrite of the Catholic bishops during the 4 councils that they had in between 317 and 340 AD. Because a Jew simply would never go this route. This is one of the reasons why there was an argument between Paul and the rest of the Jews when he went back to Jerusalem in Acts. He was really arguing with them in reference to circumcision and in reference to certain rights and actions. And he was telling them that, listen, how are you going to make them people do the stuff that you ain't even doing? That's hypocritical, first and foremost. And secondly, circumcision is a Hebrew rite. So they don't have to do that unless they're trying to fully convert as a Hebrew. If they're just trying to pick up this new understanding of Hebrew spiritualism, they don't have to be circumcised to do that. They don't have to circumcise their penis, at least. They just need to circumcise their minds and their hearts to be able to fully understand and accept what we're trying to present to them and what we're trying to give them as a gift. Other than that, what he was arguing with them about had nothing to do with what the Christian church and the Christian world typically says. And that is in reference to the argue over Sabbath. That is absolutely not true. That is a Catholic conception, period. And the reason why, and you can search this, you can look on the Catholic website, you can even look in the Catholic Encyclopedia online. When the Catholics created Christianity, they created Christianity, okay? When the Catholics created Christianity, they wanted to do their best to make the new religion as separate from Judaism as possible. And this was one of the ways that they did so, by switching the respect of the holy day from Saturday to Sunday. And like I said many, many times, you can go on their website or on their online dictionary, and the Catholics will absolutely clearly admit that they changed the day, that they felt they had the right to change the day from Saturday to Sunday, simply because of their understanding of the Gospels that Christ rose on Sunday. Okay, now I want you to also notice this. This is real interesting. Why is it that there is only one verse about that in this entire chapter? Even within this paragraph right here, he doesn't go back to talking about the respect of days. He just continues talking about eating. That verse was interjected. That verse is false. That verse is fake. That verse should not be there. It is a conjuration that was interjected for the Catholic purpose. Think about it. Let's read this entire paragraph once again and see if that first verse even at all correlates and go along with the rest of the corresponding 3 verses that come behind it. In the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship the Lord on a special day to honor him, do it to honor him. Do it to honor him. He's talking about the Sabbath. Those who worship Yahuwah on a special day, do it to honor him. They're talking about the Sabbath. And then right after that, it says, those who eat any kind of food do so to honor the Lord and gives him thanks before eating. And those who refuse to eat any certain kind of foods. So you see what I'm saying? Those two verses are interjected. They don't even go along with the rest of everything that this chapter is even talking about. Those 2 verses are outside of the subject matter of chapter 14. They were infused in there to make a subverted point, an extra sideline point that should not be there. But the interesting thing is that Yahuwah, in all his infinite wisdom, power, and strength and might, would not allow that stumbling block to completely be formed without a step in front of it. That's why it clearly says right in the beginning of verse 6, those who worship Yahuwah on a special day, do it to honor him. That is a clear distinction. It's talking about the Sabbath. So Satan and his minions wanted to put in verse 5 saying, well, anybody can respect any day, you know what I'm saying? And just make sure that you're fully convinced and you accept the day that you respect. But then Yahuwah said, oh, no, we ain't going to have that. Yo, those who worship me on a special day, they do it to honor me. Period. Let's go on, okay? Because this video is already nearly an hour long, and I haven't even gotten through the corresponding verses that reflect and give evidence and proof, okay, that this chapter has nothing to do with festival and feast days, but everything to do with what you choose to eat. So why do you condemn another believer? Why do you look down on another believer? Remember, we all stand before the judgment seat of Yahuwah, for the scriptures say, as surely as I live, says Yahuwah, every knee will bend to me and every tongue will confess and give praise to Yahuwah. For each of us will give a personal account to Yahuwah. So let's stop condemning each other. Decide instead to live in such a way that you will not cause another believer to stumble and fall. I know and am convinced on the authority of Yahuwah HaMashiach that no food, again, he's saying food, not day, not feast, not festival, food in and of itself is wrong to eat. But if someone believes it is wrong, then for that person it is wrong. And if another believer is distressed by what you eat, you are not acting in love if you eat it. Don't let your eating ruin someone for whom Yahushua died. Then you will not be criticized for doing something you believe is good. For Malkut Yahuwah, or the kingdom of Yahuwah, is not a matter of what we eat or drink, but of living a life of goodness and peace and joy in the Ruach HaKodesh. If you serve Hamashiach with this attitude, you will please Yahuwah, and others will approve of you too. So then let us aim for harmony in the congregation and try to build each other up. Don't tear apart the work of God over what you eat. Remember, all foods are acceptable, but it is wrong to eat something if it makes another person stumble. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble. Now make note that he mentioned drink wine. Okay? He mentioned drink wine. So in other words, it's not wrong for a Christian to drink. It's not against God or against the religion for a Christian to drink. It is not unholy for a Christian to drink. If you believe the words in the Bible, don't make up your own understanding. Lean not on your own understanding. And stop listening to all these fools walking around blabbing just because they got a daggone TV show and they're getting paid millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars to read something to you from the Bible. It's not wrong for a person to drink, regardless if they believe in God, if they believe in Jesus, if they believe in freaking Satan and Santa Claus. It's not wrong for a person to drink. What is wrong is for a person to get drunk, because that's when wrongful actions begin to happen. That's when drunken actions begin to happen. When a person gets drunk, they become belligerent, they become rude, they become intolerant, they become insufferable. You know, a drunk person won't have the emotional capacity not to care about cheating on his wife or cheating with his best friend's girlfriend. You know, a drunk person won't have the emotional capacity to not care that they're beating their wife to a pulp just because she disagreed with him. You see what I'm saying? So it's not wrong to drink. It's wrong to be drunk. That's why Paul says this. It is better not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble. So that means if you are a Christian that drinks, you can drink. But if you go around other Christians who don't drink or who feel that it's wrong to drink, then you should not drink around them. That's it. That's all that means. That's all that means. It just simply means you shouldn't drink around them, because you will cause them to stumble, because you will waver their faith, because you are a Christian and you're drinking in front of them where they believe as a Christian, Christians should not drink. You see what I'm saying? Okay. You might believe there's nothing wrong with what you are doing, but keep it between yourself and Yahuwah. Blessed are those who don't feel guilty for doing something they have decided to do, for something they have decided is right. But if you have doubts about whether or not you should eat something, you are sinning if you go ahead and do it, for you are not following your convictions. If you do anything you believe is not right, you are sinning. Now, that is a very heavy context that I'm going to put into another video. Because out of the Gospel of Thomas, I believe, Christ tells his disciples that they should live according to their nature and not against their nature. And if they live against their nature, they're living against creation and against the God who created them. That is a very interesting topic and subject. But like I said, that's for another video. So, okay. Once again, we see here that, first of all, Paul jumps and he talks about a couple of different topics. All right. He talks about his main topic is about eating, but he also talks about the respect of a holy day or a Sabbath day. And then he also talks about the drinking of wine, as well as vegetarianism versus carnivorism. Okay, but the main concept and the core context of this entire chapter is in reference to eating. What you should not eat, how you should not eat, and how you make that affect someone else. It has nothing to do with feast and festival days whatsoever. All right. And now to provide different forms of evidence to back this up, I'm going to provide you guys with a few different scriptural references. Okay. First and foremost, when I spoke about the holy day, in the same way, some may think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. He's talking about the pagans. They think every day is alike. So the Roman Jews, they feel one day is more holy than the other. They respect the Sabbath. The pagans, they think all days are alike. He says you should be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. So he's doing his best not to give a stumbling block to the pagan Romans who are trying to learn and understand the purpose of this new spiritual walk. Then he goes on to say, those who worship Yahuwah on a special day do it to honor him. Now, why I wanted to reiterate that is because of this. Acts 17. And it says here, Paul and Silas then traveled through the towns of Amphipolis and Apollonia and to Thessalonica, where there was a Hebrew synagogue. Now, listen to this very closely. As was Paul's custom, he went to the synagogue service for 3 Sabbaths in a row, and he used the scriptures to reason with the people. You hear that? As was his custom. In other words, this was a regularity for him to go to the synagogue, or as the Christians would call it, the church, on the Sabbath, or as the calendar would call it, Saturday. Paul's custom was to go to church on Saturday. He didn't go on Sunday. He went on Saturday, and he went consecutively 3 Saturdays in a row to teach both the Jews and the pagans. So that means even the pagans came to the church to hear the word of Yah on the Sabbath, on Saturday, which is a day that is ordained to be respected and established throughout the human generations perpetually. How can I say that? How can I say that? Well, let's see. Let's see if the Old Testament will help me verify this. We're going to go to Bimidbar. Bimidbar, that is Numbers. Bimidbar, or Bimidban. So Numbers 10. Numbers 10 and 8. Okay, that's a observance for the Levites. So let's go to 18. 18. Okay. Okay, so that's another perpetual covenant or regulation for the Levites. Now, okay, so Bimidbar, or Numbers 10, 8, and 23, or 18, 23, are both mentioning of the perpetual regulation that only the Levites are able to serve in the temple. Okay, let's go to Shamut. Excuse me. That is Exodus. Shamut. Exodus. We're going to go to Exodus 27 first. Exodus 27, 21. Exodus 27, 21 says, the lampstand will stand in the tabernacle in front of the inner curtain that shows the ark of the covenant. And Aaron and his sons must keep the lamp burning in the presence all night. It's a permanent law. So there's always supposed to be a lamp burning in the tabernacle. Okay, let's go to chapter 30 now. Chapter 30. Verse 8 says, each evening when the lights and the lamps go out, he must again burn incense to Yahuwah. It must be done from generation to generation. Perpetual. Let's go to verse 21. 21 says, they must always wash their hands and feet before they enter into the tabernacle. That also is a perpetual law. And the interesting thing is that the Muslims still utilize this law perpetually to this day. Before they pray, before they do their salats, they wash their hands, their feet, and their ears. Perpetual law. That's because they also come from Abraham. It's a perpetual law. You cannot stop doing it. In other words, it's got to continue. Now, I know I have not yet come up with the verse that sanctifies the perpetual law of the Sabbath, but I'm leading up to it, okay? Because these perpetual laws need to be mentioned even before the perpetual laws that we can and still need to acknowledge to this day need to be mentioned, okay? So now we're going to go to chapter 40. Chapter 40, verse 14 says, verse 15 says, anoint them as you did their father, so they may also serve me as priests. With their anointing, Aaron's descendants are set apart for the priesthood forever from generation to generation. So only the Levites can be the priests for the nation of Yasharal or Yisrael. Period. That is their perpetual or generational duty. It cannot pass to anyone else. No one else can be a priest. What's real interesting about that is that the fake Jews, the Jew wishes, they have inherited the actual Hebrew name for priest as a name for them. That Hebrew name is Cohen, Kohen. For the fake Jews, they spell it Cohen. Now, you will also notice that the Cohens usually have high levels in media. Check music media and check TV media, and I bet money you will find a man named Cohen at the top of it. Okay. All right. Where are we going? We're going to go to Waiaquar now. That's Leviticus. Leviticus. First, we're going to look in chapter 3. What does chapter 3, verse 17 tell us? Chapter 3, verse 17 says, you must never eat any fat or blood. This is a permanent law for you. It must be observed from generation to generation wherever you live. Wherever you live, be it America, be it China, be it Israel, be it Russia. Wherever you live, you must never eat fat or blood. This is a permanent law for people who follow God. Not just the Israelites. Because remember, the church called themselves spiritual Israel. So you guys are now spiritual Israelites, which is totally wrong and way off base. But we're going to go with that for right now. So spiritual Israel, these are still y'all's rules. These are the rules for Israel, regardless if it's spiritual or physical. So you Christians who like to eat rare meat, you're violating God's law. You're not supposed to eat bloody meat. You Christians who like to eat the fat around your steak and off your roast, you're violating God's laws. You're not supposed to eat the fat. Now, we did just go over something in Romans, and I know a lot of y'all gonna want to hit me with that. But remember, I told you that it is my duty to at least tell you what is right and what is wrong. It's your choice to figure out if you should or not. But remember, you still have to stand in front of Yah at the end. And the fact of the matter is, these are the rules that he gave us. I'm not giving you these rules. I'm just reiterating them. So you need to decide if you want to respect God or respect yourself. And most of us choose to respect ourselves above God. That's just the truth. That's the God's honest truth. We're like, man, I don't really believe that God would be like that. I don't really believe that God would say that. So I'm going to believe that God is telling me I can do this instead of believing what God tells you himself. Just like people walk around saying, well, I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But yet you call Jesus God, and Jesus said, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. He was telling you to do something right now, not later on. But yet you choose to believe yourself, and you choose to believe man over God. That's something that should convict you alone. You need to go to your war room. You need to go to your prayer pit, and you need to talk to God about that. Anyway, let's go further. Chapter 7, verse 36. Chapter 7, verse 36 says, on the day they were anointed, Yahuwah commanded the Israelites to give these portions to the priests as their permanent share from generation to generation. Again, that was about the priests. That they are the only ones to serve in the temple and to serve as God's servants perpetually throughout their generations until they die, until their whole bloodline is wiped away, which will never be. Because their bloodline is connected with Yahushua or Emmanuel or Hail Zeus. I mean, Jesus. And he is the supreme high priest in heaven, and they will be priests under him in heaven. Or I should say in the new kingdom. Anyway, okay, so we're going to chapter 10 now. And we're going to look at verse 9 and then, we're going to look at verse 9. Okay. And it says here at verse 9, you and your descendants must never drink wine or any alcoholic drink before going into the tabernacle. If you do, you will die. This is a permanent law for you, and it must be observed from generation to generation. Now, right here, all right, here is further proof and evidence that Christians are allowed to drink. Even the pastor, go have you a beer. Okay. Hey, look, you don't need to get you no old duels, man. You don't need no old duels. Go get you a Heineken. Okay. You keep the green bottle, but get something that's a little more alcoholically saturated. All right. Praise the Lord. Straight up, people. It's real. There's nothing wrong with drinking. You people take things out of context and you conjure up so much behind it that you demonize and villainize things that should not be demonized and villainized. I mean, like, take this for instance. I was arguing with a person who calls himself a pastor, and he calls himself a good pastor and this righteous person. And he does all these wonderful things, right? But he said that drinking is dirty and defiled. So I asked him, I said, well then, is Christ dirty and defiled? Because he drank. The man had the nerve to tell me that Christ didn't drink wine, but he drank grape juice. I need somebody to show me where in the Bible, where in any scripture, in any version of the Bible, does it say that Christ drank grape? Where does it say that Christ drank grape juice? Because in every Bible version I've read, it says he drank wine. As a matter of fact, he drank wine at every meal so often that the Pharisees called him a drunkard and a glutton. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put this pastor's name out. His name is Aaron Grayson. I want you to look him up on Facebook and ask him what his understanding and belief about the Bible and Christ really is, because I deem him as a false prophet. He is a false prophet and a false teacher, and he will lead many astray with his falsities and his lies and his misunderstanding and misconception of the Bible. Period, point blank. Because Christ drank wine. Who would call somebody a drunkard that just drinks grape juice? That doesn't even make sense in any kind of a way. It makes no sense. You don't call somebody a drunk that's constantly drinking juice. You call somebody a drunk that's constantly drinking alcohol. Not to mention the fact that his very first miracle recorded in the Bible was making alcohol. So much so that when the alcohol was produced to the rest of the wedding party, that one of the guests said to the groom, "Why did you keep your best wine for last?" Oh my gosh, man. You people upset me so much, man. And then they want to rag on me, man, because I'm putting out this truth, man. I'm a prophet of the Most High God. I'm a prophet of a higher Elohim. I am not be a higher Elohim. That's why I'm doing this. I am in the same spirit of Micah, of Jeremiah, the prophets that they hated and they killed. I am in that very same spirit. I'm looking forward to you folks coming after me. Come and get me. I don't care. I'm ready for you. My spirit is strong and my flesh is gaining its strength. Believe that. Okay. Anyway, let's finish this. Okay. So we're going to now go to chapter 23, and we're going to be looking at verses 14, 31, and 41. All right. And I believe within one, if not all three of these verses, will finally be the acknowledgement that the Sabbath is something that is supposed to be kept perpetually. Okay. We're going to go to verse 14. It says, "Do not eat any bread or roasted grain or fresh kernels on that day until you bring this offering to Yahuwah. This is a permanent law for you and must be observed from generation to generation wherever you live." What is this talking about? I bet this is talking about one of the feasts. Oh, what does that say? Celebration of first harvest. You know, that's the Feast of Tabernacles, I believe. Yeah, the Feast of Harvest and the Feast of Tabernacles. So that's the feast that's the feast that's at the end of the year. That's the feast that's at fall, the fall feast. He's telling us that's a permanent law for us Israel, spiritual and physical, that we are to observe this from generation to generation throughout our lives, wherever we reside, even here in America. Christians, listen. Pay attention to your Bible. Read the Bible for yourself. Stop listening to these high-paid actors that call themselves pastors. Please. They're sending you straight to a place of no return. I can't say hell because hell doesn't exist. Anyway, so now we're looking at verse 31. Okay? Verse 31 says, "You must not do any work at all. This is a permanent law for you and must be observed from generation to generation wherever you live." Did you get that? You notice this is about the Sabbath, right? Okay? And now that's the Day of Atonement, which is a Sabbath also, okay? Okay, now this, you can tell this chapter 23, is about the festivals, okay, and about the feasts and the festivals. All right. Now, if you go through here, Festival of Unleavened Bread, the first harvest, the Festival of Harvest, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, Feast of Shelters, or the Feast of Booths. Go through this entire chapter. All right. Read this chapter for yourself. Christians, spiritual Israel. God tells us that we are to observe these laws, statutes, and commandments throughout our generations, wherever we live, permanently. How can you argue against that, yo? How? How can you argue against that in any way? How? Now, I want to backtrack a little bit, because, we were talking about Paul, and we were talking about the sections that I said that the Catholics interjected, and they're just trying to find grounding. They're trying to find grounding and footing. And I told you about the fact that the Catholics were doing their best to try to separate the new Christian religion from Judaism as much as they possibly could. And one of those ways is through respect for what it's eaten, respect for days, respect for holidays, right? And we discussed how when Peter saw that sheet come down that displayed all four-footed animals, that it wasn't telling him that he can just eat any kind of meat, even though Paul says that in Romans 14. It's clearly understood when Peter explains to the three men that he's talking to that he was not given authority to eat any kind of meat that he wants, but he was given authority to now be able to communicate, congregate, and commingle with other human beings. One thing I want to point out to you in reference to that comes from Yeshayahu. That is Isaiah. Isaiah 65, verses 1 through 5. And I want you to listen to how Yahuwah, how God himself feels about us when we eat pork. Yahuwah says, I was ready to respond, but no one asked for help. I was ready to be found, but no one was looking for me. I said, yo, here I am, to a nation that did not call on my name. Name, keyword, name. All day long, I opened my arms to a rebellious people. He's talking about you blacks. He's talking about us blacks, us original Hebrews. And we still hard-headed. We still ignorant. We still rebellious. Listen what he says, though. But they follow their own evil paths and their crooked schemes. He says, all day long, they insult me to my face by worshiping their idols in their sacred gardens. They burn incense on pagan altars. At night, they go out among the graves, worshiping the dead. They eat the flesh of pigs and make stews with other forbidden foods. Yet they say to each other, don't come too close, or you will defile me. I am holier than you. These people are a stench in my nostrils and an acrid smell that never goes away. That's what he says about you people that eat pork. And even more so about you black people that decide to defy him and reject him. What's worse than blacks falling into the white culture, and as the black consciousness movement calls it, falling behind the cave beasts? What's worse is not acknowledging our origin and our creator, who gave us life and gave us a spiritual life to live so that we could be better than everyone else on earth. But we wanted to be like everyone else on earth. and yet at the same time want to still claim that we're better than everyone else on earth. How ignorantly hypocritical can people be? Seriously. Look, in the very next chapter, he goes on to reiterate his feelings about that. Those who consecrate and purify themselves in a sacred garden with its idol in the center, feasting on pork and rats and other detestable meats, will come to a terrible end, says Yahuwah. He's talking to anybody who calls themselves Israel. Spiritual, physical, metaphysical, supernatural. I don't give a hoot nanny. Whatever kind of Israel you call yourself, he's talking to Israel. So I'm talking to the Christian church, because it's the Christian church that calls themselves spiritual Israel. If you are spiritual Israel, you are in a heap of trouble, because you're not following the guidelines that were set in place for Israel. Period. You're not following the guidelines, the law, statutes, and ordinances that were put in place for Israel. You're not. How great can your heavenly hope be if you're not following the guidelines to get there? That's a question you need to ask yourself, and you need to ask your pastor. This is what I want to end you guys with. I want to end you with Matthew. That is Matthew. I want to end you guys with words from Hamashiach himself, the Messiah himself. Okay. First, we're going to go to chapter 5. We're going to look at verses 17 through 19. And 17 through 19 says, and this again, ladies and gentlemen, Christians more specifically, this is a teaching about the law. Don't misunderstand why I have come, he says. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses. Notice that, the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. I tell you the truth. Listen, Hamashiach is telling you the truth. He says, not until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is accomplished, is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws, statutes, and commandments, that is also the laws of Moses and the writings of the prophets, and teaches them, will be called Gadol. That is Hebrew for great. Gadol in Malkut Shamayim. Gadol in Malkut Shamayim. That is great in the kingdom of heaven. Gadol in Malkut Shamayim. That's the word from the Messiah himself. So you Christians who say that Paul says that the law is dead and that it has been done away with and we don't follow it, you're wrong. You're misunderstanding what he's saying completely and absolutely. Because Paul would not go against his Hebraic understanding, and he would not go against the understanding that he received from Hamashiach. Okay? Let's look at one last thing that the Messiah tells us. He says here at verse 4, don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Peep this. It's very important. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. Why? This will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed. You know what? We're going to use a different version to read that, because he says public testimony in the NIV or the NLT. All right. Okay, I'm trying to back up so I can go to, okay. Right. Matthew 8. Matthew 8:4. Okay, so let's see how these other versions label it. We'll look at the American Standard Version and the King James, and it says, "And Jesus said to him, see that you tell no one, but go show yourself to the priest and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. And Jesus said unto them, see thou tell no man, but go thy way, shew thyself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a testimony unto them." A testimony unto what? Look, the English Standard Version says, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. A proof to what? Now, see, in the New Living Version, it says, this will be public testimony that you have been cleansed. Okay? But that cleansing is still in reference to the laws prescribed by Moses for cleansing. Okay? So the testimony is still to the laws. People, the testimony is to the laws. Okay? It's not to the fact that the person was cleansed. It's not to the fact that the person was healed. It's not to the priests themselves. It's not to the fact that the priest acknowledged that the person was healed. It's to the laws. The testimony or the acknowledgement is to, or the proof of them is to the laws, people. And this is the very, 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 very last thing that I want to present to you. Right here, Revelations 20, chapter 4. And this will be my absolute verse, and I will end this video. It's been an hour and a half long, and I didn't expect it to be that long. It says, "Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. And I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God. And those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and not had received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years." Okay, let's look at that in a different version. Verse 4. It says, those who have, testimony of Jesus and the word of God. Now, when it says the word of God, know that it is talking about God's laws, statutes, and commandments. That is his word. Okay. Let's see what the King James says. Souls who were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God. That is the law of God, people. That is the law of God. In Ecclesiastes, it says the whole duty of man is to follow the commandments of Yahuwah. That's the whole duty of man. I do hope that this lesson was edifying in any kind of way. Brother Elder Jerry Russell, I'm specifically calling you out in this video because you are my love brother. Man, you are deeply ingrained in my heart. I grow when I talk to you. I learn a lot. I have learned a lot from you. And I believe now is a time and an opportunity for you to be able to learn from me. And I'm hoping that this video has been able to provide you with enough information and scriptural reference to help you understand and accept the fact that Romans 14 is not talking about festival and feast days. It is simply talking about eating, what to eat, what not to eat, and condemning someone else under a burden of what's being eaten or drank, or drunken, whatever. So with that all being said, man, I praise and glorify the Most High, Ahaya Elohim, Ahaya Elohim, Ehad. Ehad means one. Elohim is one. God is one. And I thank everybody for listening to this video. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, y'all are my favorite people. Please put your name in here, man, so I can give y'all a shout out and a highlight. Baruch and Shalom. It's Nabi Ahaya Elohim, Malek Boaz Ben Yochanan Ben Dawid. Shalom.